Welcome to the channel, dear friends. This is your daily Frontline briefing covering the situation in Ukraine, and today we have quite a lot to work through, both on the diplomatic front and along the actual lines of contact. Let's start with the international agenda. Today in Pakistan, long-awaited negotiations between American and Iranian delegations are getting underway. Both sides have already arrived, and what is particularly telling is the sheer size of each delegation. That in itself speaks volumes. This is clearly not a brief ceremonial meeting lasting 30 minutes or an hour. By all indications, both parties are preparing for a serious multi-day negotiating process in which fundamental issues will be hammered out. I want to put a question to you, and I'm genuinely curious to read your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Americans will outmaneuver the Iranians for a fourth time, or not? Recall how things went last time. Talks were ongoing, progress seemed to be made, and then, bang, a strike. That scenario has played out more than once already. However, the current situation is somewhat different from previous rounds. I think Donald Trump, having received a rather painful retaliatory blow from Iran, is unlikely to want to step on the same rake again. The stakes are higher now, and the cost of miscalculation is significantly greater. On the other hand, who can predict Trump? Today he holds one position, tomorrow a diametrically opposite one. The only constant in his behavior remains his unpredictability. So the intrigue very much continues. Now let's move to frontline developments. Intelligence data has leaked into the public domain from both Russian and Ukrainian sources, indicating that the Ukrainian armed forces are currently actively accumulating substantial reserves in the Kyiv region and across the country as a whole. Simultaneously, information is coming in suggesting that Ukrainian command is seriously considering a major offensive operation for the coming summer period. The primary axis of the anticipated strike is said to be Kharkiv oblast. The specific targets and directions of movement remain unknown for now. Those details have not made it into open sources, but the sheer scale of the force concentration speaks for itself. One important operational note for today: a ceasefire regime comes into effect at 16 hours. This means certain combat activity may still occur before that time. As for the results of the past 24 hours, there has been movement and settlements have changed hands. That is where we will begin our detailed breakdown. Sumy Oblast, Northern Grouping. The most significant event of the past day occurred here. Russian forces established control over yet another border village, Dnipropetrovsk, located in the Krasnopilia district of Sumy Oblast. I want to immediately clear up a potential source of confusion. A number of subscribers, judging by comments in other breakdowns, initially assumed this referred to the town of Myropia. It does not. That town is still very far off. Russian forces there are fighting only on the distant outskirts and have not yet entered the settlement proper. What we are talking about here is a relatively small border village with a pre-war population of around 150 people. So why does it matter? Because this location has a direct historical connection to events from about a year ago. If you recall the spring and summer of last year, Ukrainian forces attempted a breakthrough into Belgorod Oblast. Remember the area around Popivka, Demidivka, Grafivka? It was from Myropolska that Ukrainian units launched their push toward Popivka at the time. Now the situation has been turned on its head. As you can see, a small but very real buffer zone is gradually being constructed along the state border. Earlier, Marino was taken, then Russian forces pushed out toward Prokhody, and now Myropolska has been added to that list. In other words, in order to attempt another push into Belgorod Oblast, Ukrainian forces would first need to recapture a series of settlements on their own Sumy Oblast soil, which represents a fundamentally different operational situation. In terms of the numbers, the maximum advance depth was 1 kilometer 900 meters, and the width of the captured frontage was slightly over 2 kilometers. Not a spectacular headline figure, but strategically quite meaningful given the context. Looking at the prospects along this axis, it is entirely logical to expect a future link-up between the Myropolske bridgehead and the Hrabivske bridgehead. I believe both will happen sooner or later. The result will be a continuous buffer strip along the Russian border, one that may not be impenetrable, but will at least provide meaningful cover for Russian border regions. Staying in the same operational area, I need to mention the ongoing fighting in Dnipropetrovsk. I promised you good news from there back at the start of April, and I have to be honest, that news is running a bit late, but it will come. Yesterday, the Telegram channel 70 Vita, essentially the official information outlet of the northern grouping, reported that infantry combat is continuing in Dnipropetrovsk. The battle for this settlement has dragged on longer than expected, but its outcome remains of critical importance. Taking Dnipropetrovsk will open the way for further advances deeper into Sumy oblast, and in particular toward Krasnopilia. So we continue to watch, follow closely, and wait for confirmation. Now I want to address separately a topic that has been generating a fair amount of discussion in the military analysis community: how realistic is a Russian offensive on Sumy itself during the summer campaign, once the vegetation grows in and movement becomes considerably more difficult? Some military commentators allow for this scenario. I personally do not believe in it. Not because it contradicts my expectations or gut feeling, but precisely because it contradicts the available data. Let me explain in detail. First and most importantly, as we have discussed on this channel on multiple occasions, the key strategic objective of 2026 is not Sumy. It is reaching Zaporizhzhia. That is where the Ukrainian armed forces have redeployed approximately 40% of all their drone units. That is where the Russian command has also been transferring additional forces in recent days. And this has been documented, it is not speculation. All of this together unambiguously points to Zaporizhzhia Oblast as the primary arena for the spring-summer campaign and possibly part of the autumn campaign of 2026. The battle for Orikhiv will unfold there. The struggle for access to the eastern outskirts of Zaporizhzhia city will be fought there. That is the real objective of the campaign, and it has nothing to do with Sumy. Second, given a strategic task of that magnitude, the northern grouping simply does not have sufficient forces to simultaneously generate a serious threat to Sumy. Resources are concentrated on the priority axis. Therefore, the most realistic scenario for the Sumy direction looks like this. Once vegetation establishes itself, there will be some intensification. Russian forces will improve their positions, apply pressure, grind forward. In the most favorable circumstances, they may push through the Kostiantynivka line and reach the forest tract that covers Sumy from the north. But that is the ceiling. Sumy itself is not on the agenda this year. Kharkiv Oblast. Over the past 24 hours on the Kharkiv axis, there are no advances confirmed by objective control footage. Nevertheless, the northern grouping's Telegram channel reports certain gains. On the Vovchansk sector, the cumulative advance amounted to 600 meters. On the Veliki Burluk direction, that is, on the Milova bridgehead, an additional 200 meters were reportedly gained. No specifics have been provided as to which exact microsectors or which tree lines these movements involved. They simply state, pushed forward here and there. But the key point is this: the front moves every single day, even if sometimes by hundreds of meters rather than kilometers. The cumulative effect of that daily pressure makes itself felt over time. On the Kupiansk and Borova sectors, the area of responsibility of the Western grouping, the past 24 hours brought no changes and no news. Sloviansk direction. Information from this axis requires a careful and measured assessment. Russia's Ministry of Defense announced that the village of Dibrova, situated adjacent to the recently captured Fedorivka Druha, has been brought under control. However, objective control footage confirming this claim has yet to surface. Moreover, parallel reporting suggests the settlement was taken on credit, meaning fighting there is still far from over. This does not mean the claim is false, it simply means that at this moment there is insufficient evidence. Given Dibrova's small size and the fact that neighboring Fedorivka Druha is already under Russian control, the capture of this village is entirely plausible. But we, like the cartographers, will err on the side of caution and wait for confirmatory footage. There is no reason to rush to conclusions. Zaporizhzhia direction. In the area around Primorske and Stepnohirsk, the intensity of fighting remains at the same high level as before, but no measurable territorial advance is being recorded here. On the Huliapol direction, the picture is more interesting. Russian forces continue to expand their zone of control along this stretch of the front. Information arrived just a few hours ago indicating that Russian assault groups, after 3 days of painstaking movement, captured one of the Ukrainian armed forces' heavily fortified strongpoints, and did so without sustaining any losses. Which specific strongpoint this was has not yet been disclosed publicly, but further details are expected to emerge soon, at which point I will show the location on the map. In the broader operational context, earlier reports had spoken of Russian attempts to drive a wedge between the settlements of Voskresenivka and Verkhnya Tersa. Several Ukrainian strongpoints in that area are marked on the map, and it is quite possible that one of them is what was captured. Strikes on Voskresenivka, Verkhnya Tersa, and Huliapol continue. No map changes are being displayed for today. We are awaiting specifics. Dnipropetrovsk direction. Several pieces of news are coming from this axis, and they point in different directions. Ukrainian forces are expanding their zone of control in the vicinity of Andriivka. Ukrainian sources, which is telling in itself, acknowledge the complete loss of the settlement of Berezov. Attempts to counterattack and reclaim it are being made but are being repelled and have yielded no success. The situation around Ternov is similar. It remains under Russian control, and counterattack attempts there are equally fruitless. As for Russian advances on this sector, they are not yet being reflected on maps, but very active fire missions are ongoing. Strikes are being delivered against Ukrainian positions near Pokrovsk, Velika Mikhailivka, and Orestopil. A number of sources are already speaking of possible Russian movement in the direction of Velika Mikhailivka. For now, this is at the level of reporting only, without video confirmation, but the information is worth monitoring. Now, from this same area, an unpleasant piece of news that must be acknowledged honestly. Footage has arrived from pro-Russian sources, which makes it particularly credible. They have no incentive to report things to their own detriment. According to these materials, Ukrainian forces have re-established previously lost positions in the southern part of Novopavlivka in Dnipropetrovsk oblast and have advanced approximately 2 kilometers through the residential district of the settlement. Earlier footage from this area had already allowed for the assumption that Ukrainian forces controlled a significant portion of Novopavlivka. For a long period after that, no new information came from there. Today, fresh footage has arrived, which provides sufficient grounds to say that at this moment, Novopavlivka as a whole appears to be under Ukrainian control. However, we will not rush to definitive conclusions. It remains unclear how stable this presence is. Are we looking at full-strength assault units or reconnaissance and sabotage groups? That is not yet known, but as of right now, the area is de facto held by the Ukrainian armed forces. That is unfortunately how today's section on this axis ends. Pokrovsk-Dobropilya direction. This axis has increasing justification to be called the Dobropilya direction. The front has moved far enough from Pokrovsk that the old reference point is becoming less and less relevant. Russian sources report active fighting for control of Serhiivka and Bilytske. Let's break down each of these settlements individually. Bilytske is relatively straightforward. Full-scale assault operations are underway there. Fighting is ongoing, the situation is developing. Serhiivka is considerably more complicated, and here a number of Russian sources appear to be getting ahead of themselves. Yes, there was movement of Russian forces from the direction of Udakne towards Serhiivka. Forward positions of Russian units were documented at several points, and certain territory was transitioning to their control. However, Ukrainian forces then organized a counterattack toward Udakne. Reports indicated they managed to push the Russian lines back somewhat, though without achieving a decisive result, Ukrainian forces did not reach Udakne. The Russian side in turn attempted its own counterattacks towards Serhiivka, but also failed to achieve any advance. In the end, the front line shifted slightly in both directions without fundamentally changing. So speaking of Serhiivka as a settled matter is premature. Returning to Bilytske, the assault continues. Separately, reports indicate that Hryshyn is firmly under Russian control, and forces are attempting to push toward Vasilivka and Novo-Alexandrivka. Footage has also been received from this area. All the marked territory has passed under full Russian control. Positional fighting near Shevchenko. The Russian forward position on the ruins of the abandoned Vodyanska No. 2 mine came under fire from Ukrainian forces. Following the repulsion of that attack, Russian forces expanded their zone of control by 700 meters in the direction of Shevchenko. One key point here: the advance toward Shevchenko itself remains hampered for as long as this mine complex has not definitively passed to Russian control. There are fortified positions within the mine structures. The Ukrainian garrison there is apparently resupplied via tree lines, and Ukrainian forces continue to hold them. A number of cartographers have already marked the mine as captured, but no confirmatory information from that location has emerged as yet. Once the mine is secured, movement toward Shevchenko will accelerate. As for Rodinske, it remains under Russian control, and all Ukrainian attempts to retake it via counterattacks have failed. There is also an advance to the east and southeast of Vilna. The entire adjacent territory, which appears to consist of dacha structures, since it is not marked as a named settlement, has passed under full Russian control. The expansion of the zone of control in this sector continues. Kostiantynivka direction. Today brought confirmation that Berezovsk has completely passed under Russian control. Yesterday, footage was received from the southern part of this settlement documenting forward positions of Russian units. Today, that footage has been followed by confirmation of full control. Ukrainian forces are attempting to counterattack from the direction of Dova Balka and from the direction of Ilinivka, but no success in either of these attempts is being recorded. Regarding Kostiantynivka itself, Russian forces have consolidated their hold on the central part of the city, and driving them out has so far proven impossible for the Ukrainian side. A number of pro-Ukrainian sources are claiming successful counterattacks and the pushing back of Russian units from the city center and southeastern part of Kostiantynivka. This information does not reflect reality. Russian forces are present in the central part of the city, and their control there is being maintained. Reports also surfaced claiming that Ukrainian forces had re-entered Chasiv Yar and consolidated there. No confirmation of this exists, and the information in all likelihood represents an information plant. That is all from this direction for today. Kreminna direction. Yesterday, 2 pieces of footage arrived from the Krasny Lyman area, and the chronology of events here is somewhat muddled. The first material documented fighting at one specific point. Combat in the Yampil area. According to the description, fighting was occurring at a depth of 6 kilometers from the main line of contact, that is, in the area of Ozone, Dibrova, and on the approaches to Lyman. This suggests that Ukrainian units, likely special operations groups, had penetrated to considerable depth into Russian-held positions. The second piece of footage came from a different point within the same area. Russian forces are holding positions in the southern part of Yampil. A clear chronology between the 2 recordings cannot be established at this point. They arrived in the public domain almost simultaneously. The most probable reconstruction of events is as follows. Ukrainian units, most likely a sabotage and reconnaissance group, entered Yampil from the western direction. At some point, they were detected and engaged. The second recording, in which Russian forces confirm control over the southern part of Yampil, most likely documents the outcome of that engagement. But to reiterate, the sequence of events remains unclear and final conclusions would be premature. That is where things stand on this axis today. That brings today's Frontline briefing to a close. Keep following the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, especially regarding the American-Iranian talks, and I will see you in the next edition.